Once, there was a monkey who could leap across heaven. He had challenged dragons, argued with kings, stolen from immortals, and frightened the courts of the gods. He had moved like fire, like thunder, like a thought that refused to obey. And then, for 500 years, he could not move at all. So tonight, let us begin gently, with a story that moves like mist over mountains. Slowly, quietly, without hurry. This is Boring Classics. And tonight, we return to journey to the west, not to the noise of heaven, not to battle, but to a mountain, to stillness, and to a monkey who must learn, at last, how to wait. The mountain did not roar, it did not burn, it did not tremble, it simply rested upon him. 5 elements mountain stood between earth and sky, wide and silent, as though it had always been there. Beneath it, Sun Wukong remained. The Monkey King, who had once shaken heaven, could no longer lift his body from the stone. Only his head, his hands, and the restless brightness of his eyes remained visible to the world. At first, he raged. He shouted at the mountain. He cursed the heavens. He pulled against stone, with all the strength that had once terrified gods. But the mountain did not answer. It only stayed. And slowly, Wukong began to understand that there are some prisons strength cannot break. For a long time, anger was all he had. It kept him awake. It gave shape to the days, though the days no longer moved as they once had. He remembered heaven, the golden halls, the startled faces of immortals, the sound of weapons raised against him. He remembered laughter too, his own laughter, wild, certain, impossible to contain. And now, there was only stone. Stone above him, earth around him, clouds passing where he could not follow. He had once believed that freedom meant never being stopped, never bowing, never waiting. But beneath the mountain, freedom became something else, something far away, something he could see only in birds, in wind, in the drifting shadows of clouds. Time began to pass, not like a river, not like the quick movement of battle, but like moss, slowly, silently, almost without being seen. Spring came first. Green returned to the slopes. Small flowers opened near the stones. Birds built nests in branches above him. Then summer arrived, heavy with heat and insects. Autumn followed, laying dry leaves across the ground. And winter came, covering the mountain in pale snow. Wukong saw them all, season after season, year after year. He could not turn away from time. He could not outrun it, could not leap beyond it, could not laugh it aside. He could only remain. And remaining, for one who had always moved, was its own kind of lesson. At first, he filled the silence with his own voice. He shouted stories of his greatness. He named the battles he had won, the gods he had defeated, the titles he had claimed for himself. Great sage equal to heaven. The name still burned inside him, but no one answered. The mountain did not bow. The wind did not applaud. Even the birds, after a while, stopped being startled by him. So his voice grew less frequent. His anger did not vanish, but it grew tired. And beneath that tiredness, there was something unfamiliar, a space he had never allowed himself to enter, a quiet place where pride had no audience and power had nowhere to go. For the first time, Sun Wukong was forced to sit with himself. 500 years is a long time, long enough for storms to come and go without being remembered, long enough for roots to push deeper into the earth, for branches to bend and thicken, for pathways to appear where once there had been none. Wukong watched all of it. He watched rain gather in hollows of stone. He watched lichens spread in pale green maps across the mountain face. He watched wild grasses bow in the wind, rise again, and bow once more. At first, he counted the days, then the seasons, then the years. But after a while, time became too large to hold in numbers. It no longer felt like something to conquer. It became something wider, something he lived inside. And though he did not notice the change at first, waiting began to alter him. Not all at once, not enough to make him gentle, not enough to make him humble, but enough to quiet the sharpest edge of his restlessness. Even stone is worn smooth by water, and even a proud heart, left long enough in silence, begins to listen differently. One day, as clouds moved softly along the mountain ridges, another presence came near. It was not loud. It did not arrive with thunder, or with banners, or with the shining armor of heaven's generals. It came quietly. Guanyan, the bodhisattva of compassion, passed through that region on a sacred errand. She had been charged with finding a pilgrim, one who would travel west in search of scripture, carrying not weapons, but devotion. And as she moved through the mountain paths, she heard a voice calling out, not as fierce as it once had been, still proud, still sharp, but worn now by time. Sun Wukong saw her, and knew at once that this was no ordinary being. So he spoke quickly. He told her of his punishment, of the mountain, of the long years spent beneath it, and then, with the old fire returning to his voice, he begged for release. Guanyan listened. She did not mock him. She did not scold him. She simply looked upon him, with the steady gaze of one who sees more than anger, more than pride, more than the shape of a single moment. And she told him this. A monk would one day come, a pilgrim on the road to the west. If Wukong would protect him, follow him, and accept the path set before him, then the mountain would no longer be his end. It would become his beginning. After Guanyan departed, the mountain did not lift. The stone did not crack. The wind continued as it always had. And yet, something had changed. For the first time in many years, Wukong was no longer waiting without shape or meaning. Now there was a promise, not of immediate freedom, not of triumph, not of returning to the reckless glory of old days, but of a road, a task, a future that depended not on rebellion, but on service. This was not the kind of hope he would once have chosen. In earlier days, he would have wanted the mountain shattered, the heavens defeated, his freedom returned by force. But time had altered the shape of hope. Now, it came more quietly, not like fire, not like thunder, but like the first pale line of dawn, appearing behind a ridge of dark hills, small, distant, enough. And so he waited again, but not as before. This time, he waited for someone, far away. Another journey had already begun. A monk walked across the land. He was not powerful in the way Wukong had once admired. He did not command armies. He did not shine with divine force. He carried no great weapon, and no fearsome reputation went before him. He was simply a man, walking west. His robes were plain. His steps were measured. His face was gentle, though not untouched by uncertainty. This was Tang Sanzang, a monk chosen to undertake a sacred pilgrimage. He would travel far beyond the borders of the Tang Empire, through wilderness, through kingdoms, through danger and wonder, seeking the Buddhist scriptures that would bring wisdom back to his homeland. He did not yet know how much would be asked of him. He did not yet know that the road ahead would require not only faith, but companions. And so, while one traveler moved steadily toward the mountain, another waited beneath it. One carried compassion, the other carried strength. Neither was complete alone, but the road, which has a way of bringing together what is needed, was already drawing them toward each other. At last, the monk came near the mountain. The road had grown narrow by then, winding through rock and wild grass, through silence, through the kind of stillness that makes even footsteps seem louder. Tang Sanzang walked carefully. The air was clear, the sky open above him, and then, just as he passed near the mountain's shadow, a voice called out. At first, it seemed to come from nowhere, not from the path, not from the trees, not from the sky. It came from the mountain itself. The monk stopped. He listened. Again the voice called, bright, quick, impatient even after centuries. It asked who was passing. It asked where he was going. It spoke with a strange mixture of eagerness and urgency, as though the speaker had long been waiting for this exact moment. Tang Sanzang looked around, but saw no person standing there. Only stone, only grass, only the great quiet mountain. And yet the voice remained, alive beneath the stillness. When Tang Sanzang drew closer, he finally saw him. There, beneath the weight of the mountain, was a monkey, not an ordinary one. His face was bright and intelligent, his eyes quick with life. Even after 500 years of stillness, there was something fierce about him, something impossible to mistake. Stone pressed upon him, but could not erase him. Wukong looked at the monk with intense attention, as though trying to measure him at once. Was this truly the one? This quiet man in plain robes, with gentle eyes and an unremarkable staff. This did not look like the sort of figure who could change destiny. And yet, something in Tang Sanzang's presence was different from the gods and warriors Wukong had known. There was no arrogance in him, no desire to dominate, only steadiness, only compassion, only a kind of inward strength that does not need to announce itself. So the monkey spoke quickly. He told the monk who he was, the great sage equal to heaven, once feared in heaven, now trapped beneath this mountain by the Buddha's power. He said that Guan Yan had promised a pilgrim would come, and if this monk would release him, he would follow him west. He would serve him, protect him, travel beside him. Tang Sanzang listened, and in that strange meeting, between the still monk and the restless monkey, something ancient began to move. Tang Sanzang wished to help him, but the mountain was no ordinary mountain, and Wukong's prison had not been made by human hands. There was a seal there, a sacred talisman placed by the Buddha, holding the great weight of power in place. Tang Sanzang could not simply pull the mountain apart. He could not break divine law with force. So he looked carefully and followed the instructions that had been left for this moment. He climbed to the place where the seal had been set. The air was thin there. The wind moved softly across the stone, and with reverence, with the quiet seriousness of one who understands that some actions matter far beyond themselves, he removed the sacred paper. There was no explosion, no violent tearing of the world, only a shift, a release, as though something long held in suspension had finally been allowed to continue. The mountain loosened its claim. The old punishment had reached its end, and after 500 years of waiting, the moment had come. When the weight of the mountain lifted, Sun Wukong emerged into open air once more. After so many years, the world must have seemed impossibly wide. The sky, the wind, the freedom to move. He stretched his limbs. He looked around, and for a moment, the old energy flashed through him again. Bright, swift, almost too large for the earth to hold. But this was not the same monkey who had once leapt recklessly toward heaven. Something had passed through him beneath that mountain. Something slower than triumph. Something quieter than defeat. He turned to Tang Sanzang. And then, in a gesture he would once have resisted, he bowed, not perfectly, not without reluctance, not because pride had vanished altogether, but because he knew, in some deep and undeniable way, that the road before him had begun here. This monk had not conquered him. He had released him, and from that release came a bond. Wukong accepted Tang Sanzang as his master. The mountain lay behind him now. The road to the west lay ahead. So they began to walk. It was, in one sense, a very small beginning. A monk, a monkey, a road stretching quietly ahead. There were no drums, no heavenly signs written across the sky, no grand procession marking the start of their journey, only footsteps. Tang Sanzang walked with the same measured calm he had brought to the mountain. Sun Wukong walked beside him, or rather, around him, ahead of him, behind him, never quite able at first to keep to a single pace. Freedom had only just returned to his limbs. After 500 years beneath stone, movement itself seemed almost miraculous. He leapt onto boulders. He climbed trees for the pleasure of climbing. He looked into the distance as though testing whether the world was truly open again. Again and again, his body moved faster than the road required. And yet, each time, he came back to the monk, back to the path, back to the quiet figure whose slowness did not weaken the journey, but gave it shape. It was an unusual sight. One carried almost no outward strength. The other seemed to contain too much. And still, they walked together, as though the road had long been waiting for exactly this pairing. Wukong had promised to follow, and in his own way, he meant it. He had accepted Tang Sanzang as master. He had bowed. He had begun the journey. But a vow does not transform the heart in a single moment. The old self was still very near. He was still quick to judge, still impatient with weakness, still inclined to solve difficulty through force. If the path was blocked, he wanted to clear it at once. If danger seemed near, his hand moved toward action before thought had fully arrived. He had lived too long by speed, by instinct, by the confidence that his power could cut through any problem, before it had time to become complicated. Tang Sanzang was different. He did not rush toward conflict. He looked longer, listened more, and seemed always to believe that the first answer need not be the sharpest one. This difference was not yet a source of harmony. It was only a difference. But the journey had just begun, and already it carried within it the first quiet tension between them. Strength that wished to move quickly, and compassion that insisted on moving carefully. The road would ask both of them to learn from the other. There was another thing Wukong had to learn. Tang Sanzang was not like the rulers Wukong had defied before. He was not like the Jade Emperor, seated high above the world. He was not like the heavenly generals, who answered disorder with weapons. He was not even like the Buddha, whose single act of power had brought Wukong's rebellion to an end. Tang Sanzang commanded no armies. He issued no threats. He did not try to dominate what stood before him. And yet, his authority did not disappear because of that. It simply took another form. It was the authority of purpose. The authority of someone who has chosen a road and continues upon it, even without grandeur, even without certainty, even without force. This was difficult for Wukong to understand. He had always associated power with display, with motion, with impact, with the ability to make others yield. But here beside him walked a man who possessed almost none of that, and still could not easily be turned aside. Tang Sanzang was gentle, but not weak, quiet, but not empty, soft, but not without direction. And perhaps that was why Wukong, though he did not fully understand the monk, began, little by little, to respect him. But respect alone would not be enough. The world ahead held dangers, and Wukong's nature was not easily contained. He was loyal in bursts, obedient in moments, sincere even, but still wild. So before the road could truly deepen, another safeguard was placed upon him. Through Guanyin's arrangement, Tang Sanzang received a magic headband. It seemed small, simple, almost unremarkable. When Wukong wore it, he did not yet understand what it meant. But this, too, was part of the path. For if he was to protect the monk, if he was to travel not as a rebel but as a disciple, then strength alone could not guide him. He would need restraint. He would need to learn that not every impulse deserves action. Not every anger deserves expression. Not every power deserves release. The headband was not merely a device of control. It was a sign, a visible reminder, that freedom without discipline is only another form of wandering. Wukong did not welcome such a lesson. No proud heart does. But the road to the west was never meant to preserve him exactly as he had been. It was meant to change him. The road to the west did not remain quiet for long. At first, it seemed almost peaceful. A narrow path, a slow wind, the sound of footsteps over dust and stone. But this was a world where mountains had spirits, where forests kept secrets, and where not every shape seen at a distance was what it first appeared to be. Tang Sanzang walked with trust, perhaps too much trust. He saw travelers and thought of people. He saw shelters and thought of rest. He heard voices and thought of those who might need help. Wukong saw differently. He watched shadows. He listened beneath ordinary sounds. He noticed when birds went silent, when wind changed direction, when a smile did not reach the eyes. To Tang Sanzang, the world was full of beings to be saved. To Wukong, it was full of dangers pretending otherwise. And very soon, the road began to prove him right. The first danger came gently, not with a roar, not with weapons raised high, but in an ordinary shape, appearing along the road, as though it belonged there. Tang Sanzang slowed. His compassion moved before caution. He was ready to speak, to ask, to offer help. But Wukong stepped forward first. His eyes narrowed. There was no hesitation in him now. The stillness of the mountain was gone from his body, replaced by that old swift certainty. In a single movement, he placed himself between the monk and the danger. The disguise did not deceive him. The road, which seemed so empty a moment before, suddenly revealed its hidden edge. For Tang Sanzang, the moment was troubling. He saw Wukong's force, and worried that force might be too quick. But for Wukong, there had been no question. His master was in danger, and he had promised to protect him. For the first time, his strength had a direction beyond himself. Afterward, the road grew quiet again, but the silence between master and disciple was no longer simple. Tang Sanzang was troubled. He knew Wukong had protected him. He knew the danger had been real. And yet, he could not help feeling sorrow at how quickly violence had entered the path. To him, every being, even a dangerous one, still belonged somewhere within the great circle of life. Wukong did not understand this hesitation. He had seen the truth. He had acted. He had saved his master. What more was there to consider? And so they walked on, both silent for a time, one carrying compassion so wide that it sometimes failed to protect itself, the other carrying strength so sharp that it sometimes failed to see anything beyond danger. Neither was wrong entirely. Neither was complete. And the road, quiet beneath their feet, would have to teach them both. Soon, the lesson became sharper. When Wukong acted too fiercely, when his strength rushed beyond Tang Sanzang's understanding, the headband revealed its power. A few words, a sacred spell, and suddenly, Pain tightened around Wukong's brow. He stopped. His hands rose to his head. His body bent. Not beneath a mountain this time, but beneath something smaller, closer, and impossible to strike. For one who had endured stone for 500 years, this was a different kind of suffering. The mountain had held his body. The headband touched his will. It reminded him that he was no longer wandering alone, that his power now existed within a relationship, a vow, a path. Wukong hated it. Of course he did. No wild thing loves its first lesson in restraint. But beneath the anger, beneath the pain, something was being carved into him. Not obedience alone. Something deeper. The slow knowledge. That strength, if it is to serve anything good, must learn to stop. After the pain passed, Wukong said very little. But silence did not mean peace. His anger walked beside them, just as surely as his shadow did. He had been freed from the mountain, only to find another kind of restraint waiting for him. A smaller prison, perhaps, but one that followed wherever he went. He looked at Tang Sanzang differently now, not with hatred. Not exactly, but with a sharpness that had returned. A question, a wound. Had he truly been released? Or had he only exchanged one form of captivity for another? Tang Sanzang sensed the change. He did not celebrate the headband's power. He did not seem pleased to have control over such a disciple. If anything, the power saddened him, because to restrain another being, even for the sake of the path, is still a heavy thing. And so they walked on, one hurt by control, one burdened by having to use it. Between them, the road grew quieter than before. Tang Sanzang was gentle, but gentleness did not make the road simple. He believed in compassion. He believed in patience. He believed that every being, even one twisted by hunger or anger, belonged somewhere within the vast field of suffering. But he was also beginning to understand that compassion without protection could become helplessness, and protection without compassion could become cruelty. This was the difficulty placed before him. He had accepted Wukong as his disciple. But what did it mean? To guide someone so powerful? What did it mean? To correct him? To restrain him? To trust him? And still not break him? The scriptures were far ahead. The road was only beginning. And already, Tang Sanzang could see that the journey would not only test his body, it would test the shape of his mercy. Mercy not as a soft feeling, but as a difficult practice. A practice that must sometimes walk beside fear, and still not abandon love. Wukong had known punishment. He had known defeat. He had known stone, silence, and 500 years of being unable to move. But this new wound was different. The mountain had been outside him. The headband was closer. It sat upon his brow, like a thought he could not remove. A reminder that his freedom now had conditions. For a proud heart, this was difficult to bear. And yet, beneath his resentment, there was another truth. No one had forced him to promise. He had chosen the road. He had asked to be released. He had said he would follow. That memory troubled him, because if he had chosen, then this was not merely captivity. It was responsibility. And responsibility is often more difficult than punishment. Punishment comes from outside. Responsibility asks something from within. Wukong did not yet know how to carry that, but the road would teach him. Slowly, again and again. That evening, they stopped beside a quiet stream. The sky dimmed slowly. Light gathered on the water and broke into soft pieces. Tang Sanzang sat in silence. Wukong crouched nearby, restless, but no longer ready to leave. Neither of them spoke for a long while. There was too much between them now, the simple words to solve. And yet, neither turned away. This too was a beginning. Not the cheerful beginning of easy friendship, not the perfect obedience of a disciple who has already learned, but something more honest. Two very different beings, bound now by a road neither could complete alone. Wukong still resented the headband. Tang Sanzang still feared the cost of using it. But when morning came, they rose. The monk lifted his staff. The monkey adjusted the small bundle on his shoulder. And together, they continued west. The road did not teach quickly. It taught by distance, by hunger, by weather, by nights when the fire burned low, and the mountains seemed endless around them. It taught through small difficulties that could not be defeated with a single blow. A river too wide to cross easily, a path lost beneath fallen branches, a village where suspicion met them at the gate. Again and again, Wukong found that strength could solve some things, but not all things. It could break stone, it could frighten enemies, it could leap over ravines, and carry him higher than any ordinary traveler. But strength could not make Tang Sanzang walk faster. It could not make trust appear where fear had taken root. It could not turn every closed door into an open one. And so, without quite wishing to, Wukong began to learn a slower kind of attention. The road did not ask him to stop being strong. It asked him to become more than strong. At first, pausing felt unnatural to Wukong. He had always moved before doubt could catch him. If danger appeared, he struck. If a path was blocked, he climbed. If someone challenged him, he answered with speed, with laughter, with the certainty of a being who had never liked waiting. But now, again and again, Tang Sanzang asked him to pause, to look again, to listen, to ask whether the shape before them was truly an enemy, or only a frightened creature, or a lost traveler, or a test neither of them yet understood. Sometimes Wukong obeyed, sometimes he did not. Sometimes the headband reminded him, before wisdom could. But slowly, very slowly, a space began to appear, between impulse and action. Only a small space, a breath, a moment. But even a moment can change the shape of a deed. And for Sun Wukong, who had once moved faster than thought, that single moment was the beginning of discipline. Tang Sanzang was also learning. Though he was the master, he was not complete. He carried faith, but faith does not remove fear. He carried compassion, but compassion does not always know what to do when danger comes wearing an ordinary face. At times, he looked at Wukong and wondered whether such wild strength could ever truly walk beside holiness. And yet, again and again, Wukong protected him, not perfectly, not gently, always, but sincerely. When the night was cold, Wukong found shelter. When the road was dangerous, he walked ahead. When unseen things watched from the trees, he did not sleep as deeply as the monk did. Tang Sanzang began to understand that Wukong's fierceness was not only pride, it was also vigilance. It was also loyalty, still rough in shape, still unpolished, but real. And just as Wukong had to learn restraint, the monk had to learn trust. Their bond did not become gentle all at once. It was not a friendship easily spoken of. Not yet. There were still arguments, still misunderstandings, still moments when Wukong felt confined, and Tang Sanzang felt afraid of the force walking beside him. But something had begun. Not loudly, not cleanly, not in the way stories sometimes pretend. That understanding arrives all at once. It began in repetition, in morning departures, in shared meals, in silence after danger, in the simple fact that each day, when the road continued, they continued with it, together. Wukong still looked back sometimes, in the direction of the mountain, Tang Sanzang still looked ahead, towards scriptures he had not yet reached. One carried the memory of punishment, the other carried the burden of purpose. And between them, slowly, the road began to weave something neither of them yet had a name for. The mountain did not disappear, even after Wukong had left it behind. It remained, far behind them now, rising from the earth, silent beneath the changing sky. But for Wukong, it had become more than a place. It was memory, a weight that had once held his body, and now lingered somewhere within him. Sometimes, when the road grew quiet, he thought of the stone, of the seasons, of the long years when the world had moved. And he had not. He did not speak of it often, perhaps because pride still stood guard over certain parts of him. But the memory stayed, not only as punishment, not only as shame, but as a boundary between who he had been and who he was beginning to become. The mountain had stopped him. The road was now remaking him. And somewhere between stillness and movement, between restraint and freedom, Sun Wukong began, at last, to change. But change did not mean Wukong became quiet. Not completely. He was still quick, still clever, still capable of mischief, and laughter, and sudden flashes of impossible strength. The road had not erased the Monkey King. It had not made him smaller, and perhaps that was important, because the purpose of the journey was never to destroy what made him bright. It was not meant to turn fire into ash. It was meant to teach fire where to burn. Wukong's wildness remained, but slowly, it began to bend toward protection. His speed, toward service. His sharp eyes, toward seeing danger before it could harm another. His strength, toward something more lasting than pride. This was not an easy transformation, nor a finished one, but it had begun. And sometimes, that is the most important part of any journey. Not arriving changed, but realizing that change has finally started. The road to the west stretched on, farther than sight, farther than comfort, farther than either master or disciple could yet imagine. There would be rivers, mountains, demon caves, temptations in beautiful forms, fear disguised as kindness, danger disguised as need. There would be moments when Tang Sanzang's compassion would make him vulnerable, moments when Wukong's strength would make him severe, moments when trust would break, then return, not quite the same as before, but deeper. This was only the beginning. A monk and a monkey, walking toward scriptures and toward themselves, one learning that mercy must sometimes be brave, the other learning that power must sometimes bow. And between them, the road continued, dust beneath their feet, sky above, the mountain behind, the west ahead. And so tonight, we leave them there, not at the end of the journey, only at its beginning. The Monkey King is free now, but freedom, as he will learn, is not the same as having no limits. Sometimes freedom begins when strength finds a direction, when pride meets patience, when a restless heart is given a road long enough to become something else. 500 years beneath a mountain did not end Sun Wukong's story. It prepared him for it. The candle burns low, the page grows quiet, and somewhere, beyond mist and mountains, a monk and a monkey continue west.